I come from a village in Germany, more precisely from Cologne, Germany, a city in the west of the country. My village is called Ports. There isn't much going on there. Back then, mostly elderly people lived there, a quiet area. It was rare that anything spectacular ever happened. The only thing that keeps the place alive is the airport nearby. Many people living in Ports work there. However, in the early 90s, unrest began. Now and then, parents reported their children missing. The police tried everything to solve the cases, but nothing happened. The situation was very tense. People wouldn't let their children play outside alone. No one knew whether the kids had run away or if they had been abducted. My mother didn't want to let me go out alone either. Her fear was simply too big. I understood her, but I was a child who always wanted to push boundaries. One day, I saw her sleeping on the couch. This was my chance. I put on my shoes and left the house. I wandered around and let my imagination run wild. I completely lost track of time. I walked through the nearby woods, looking for other children. Time passed, and it got dark. I wanted to start heading home when something happened. I saw the village church in the distance. I didn't think much of it until I noticed what looked like a light inside. That seemed odd, and being the curious kid I was, I sneaked up to the building. Normally, no one should be in there at that hour, so what was going on? I reached the back entrance and slowly walked around the building. I passed a window and thought I heard voices. I lifted myself just enough to look inside. It was the village priest. I could barely make him out. Only a few candles were burning, casting a huge shadow of the priest on the wall. I couldn't see what he was doing, so I decided to sneak inside. The back door wasn't locked. I went in and tried not to make a sound. Eventually, I got close enough to hear the priest. He seemed very nervous. He didn't look as friendly as he did on Sundays. Something was definitely wrong. I knew he must not see me. That would be bad for me. I stayed quiet and waited. At some point, he went down to the basement. That was my chance. I quickly ran into the room and hid behind the pews. When he came back up, he was on the phone. Shortly after, 2 other men entered the church. One of them asked why he had left the door unlocked. The priest froze for a moment and said he must have forgotten. "I've prepared everything," said the priest, and told the 2 men to go to the basement. They went downstairs. The priest looked around the room for a moment and then followed. Now I knew for sure that something was terribly wrong. I tried to hide as best as I could. I heard voices from the basement. Metal sounds like something clicked. I tried to get closer to hear better, and then it happened. My foot hit a metal candle stand, and it fell over. Suddenly everything went silent. I quickly found a new hiding spot. Then footsteps. Lots of footsteps. They all came upstairs. "What was that?" one of the men asked. "Something just fell over," the priest replied. "Don't worry about it." "Okay, I'll give you half now, and tomorrow I'll bring the rest of the money," one of the men said. "All right," said the priest, and the men left through the back door. When the priest was alone, his face suddenly changed. He looked evil. He walked slowly through the church. His steps were heavy but confident. I knew that he knew I was still there. "I saw you, little boy," he said. My blood froze in my veins. He knew I was there. "You can't hide for long. You don't need to hide. I'm a nice man. Come on out, let's play." But I knew he didn't want to play. I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see. If he found me, I was in serious trouble. I even tried to breathe quietly. He walked around the church a few more times and then said to himself, "Maybe he really is gone." He packed up some things, put out the candles, and left the church. I stayed there for at least 20 more minutes, frozen in fear. What had just happened? I couldn't believe it. Eventually, naive as I was, I crawled out of my hiding spot. I just wanted to go home. It was all too much. Just get out. Out of there. As I headed for the back door, I saw the moon shining through the same window where I had first seen the priest. On the floor, a shadowy silhouette. I looked at the window, and I thought I would die. The priest was standing there, looking at me with an evil grin. "I knew I saw you, stupid boy. Let's play." He rushed into the church, and I hid again. He ran wildly through the whole building. "I'm going to kill you, you stupid boy," he shouted while desperately searching for me. He came closer and closer. I was inside a closet, and I saw him through the crack, right in front of me. He had nothing on him. Suddenly, he started laughing quietly and said, "You are a really stupid boy. He had me now. He grabbed the closet door. This was it. He was going to kill me. And suddenly, police! Get on the ground. The priest lay down and the police rushed into the church. And last came my mother. As if she had known I would sneak out, she had placed a tracker inside my shoes. She searched for me together with the police. That was what saved me. I told the police everything. They went into the basement and found the 2 missing children. The priest was part of a gang that kidnapped children to sell their organs. My recklessness almost got me killed, and my mother's intelligence saved my life. I'm not really a religious person anymore. After what I saw, I just can't be. But for most of my 20s, my whole life revolved around my church. It was one of those big modern community churches. We had a coffee shop in the lobby, a band with electric guitars, and hundreds of members. It felt like a family. That's where I met Anna. Anna was one of my best friends. She was sweet, a little quiet, and just kind. The sort of person who'd remember your birthday and actually call you. She was married to David. To everyone at church, David was the perfect guy. He was charismatic, played guitar on the worship team, and always had his arm around Anna. They looked like the model couple. But when it was just me and Anna, I saw things. I saw how his eyes would go flat and cold if she laughed too loudly at someone else's joke. I saw how he'd grab her wrist, just a little too tight, when he wanted to leave a party. He called it being protective. I called it what it was, controlling. Anna would confide in me sometimes, in hushed tones. She'd talk about how he'd accidentally break her things, or how he'd block the doorway with his body, and joke about not letting her leave until she said she loved him. Little things that, by themselves, just sound like a passionate or difficult marriage. But when you line them all up, they spell out abuse. I told her to leave. Over and over, I told her my apartment was always open. But she was terrified. Not just of him, but of what the church would say. Our pastor was very, very big on the sanctity of marriage. Divorce was the ultimate sin, worse than anything else. The night it happened, I got a call at 3 a.m. It wasn't Anna. It was a nurse from the local hospital. She said Anna had been in an accident and had listed me as her emergency contact. My heart just stopped. I drove there, shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. They let me into her room. The whole left side of her face was a mess of bandages, caked in blood. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. He did this, she said. She told me everything. She had finally done it. She had packed a bag while he was out. She was just zipping it up when he came home early. He saw the bag. He didn't yell. That's what scared her the most. He just went to the bedroom closet, pulled out the handgun he kept in a safe, and walked back to her. He pressed the muzzle of it right against her temple. "You really think you're going anywhere?" he'd asked her. Anna told me she thought she was going to die, right there in her own hallway. All she could think about was not wanting him to be the last thing she saw. So she acted. She grabbed his wrist and shoved him, trying to push the gun away. And he shot. The sound was deafening. She said her whole head felt like it had exploded. She collapsed, clutching her ear, positive she was dead. The bullet had torn right through the top of her ear, grazing her scalp. A centimeter lower, and she'd be gone. "David," she said, just dropped the gun and started crying. "I didn't mean to," he wailed. "Oh my God, Anna, I didn't mean to shoot. It was an accident." He's the one who called 911, telling them she had tried to grab his gun, and it went off. I took her home with me from the hospital. The police had already taken his guns, and she got an emergency restraining order. She filed for divorce the next day. I thought, finally, the nightmare was over. I thought she was safe. That's when the real horror began. We didn't go to church for 2 weeks. When we finally went back, the atmosphere was wrong. People were looking at us, not with sympathy, but with judgment. After the service, the pastor's wife, a woman I had always admired, came over. She put a hand on Anna's arm. "Anna, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We've all been praying for you, and for David." This must be so hard on him. I just stared at her. "Hard on him?" I said. The woman ignored me. "David is just broken up," she continued. "He's been in Pastor John's office every day, just weeping and repenting. He told us all about the accident." "It wasn't an accident," Anna said. Her voice was small but firm. "He held a gun to my head." The pastor's wife smiled, a tight, horrible little smile. Yes, but he didn't mean to shoot, did he? That's what he said. He said you shoved him. Anna, you know better than that. A wife is meant to be a calming spirit for her husband, not to provoke him. I felt sick. I physically felt the blood drain from my face. It got worse. Over the next week, they started calling. Members of the church, friends of ours, they all had the same message. You know, the Bible says to forgive, one of the elders told her over the phone. Marriage is a covenant. You can't just break it because of one mistake, another said. He's your husband. You're supposed to help him, not abandon him when he needs you most. Then came the final, awful blow. A group of 3 women from her Bible study group came to my apartment. They said they needed to talk to Anna. They sat her down on my couch and staged an intervention. We love you, Anna, one of them started. But we are truly worried for your soul. You are letting bitterness and anger win. David is a good man, another said. He just has a temper, but you knew that. And the story we're hearing, well, we heard that if you hadn't shoved him, the gun never would have gone off. They blamed her. They actually openly blamed her for getting shot in the head. They told her she had a spirit of rebellion and that she was the one who broke the peace in the home. They said if she truly loved God, she would drop the restraining order, stop the divorce, and go home to her husband, to heal him. Anna just sat there, silent, the stitches in her ear still bright red. That was the last time she ever went to that church. A month later, she moved to a different state to live with her sister. She changed her name. I haven't seen her in person since, though we text sometimes. I stayed for a few more weeks. I couldn't believe it. I watched as David was welcomed back. He'd stand up during the service and give these tearful testimonies about his struggle and how the enemy had tried to destroy his marriage, and people would nod, they'd pat him on the back, they'd pray for him. The man who put a gun to his wife's head was the victim. The woman who got shot was the sinner. I finally understood. The real horror isn't always the monster with the gun. Sometimes, it's the smiling faces in the room who, after you've barely escaped, try to convince you to go back into the monster's cage. Because to them, your safety was never as important as their rules. And now I have converted to Islam. This happened back in 2018 when I was working as a custodian at St. Mary's Church in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. I was 28 at the time, single, and needed a steady job after bouncing around construction gigs. The church was an old brick building, built in the 1950s, nothing fancy, just a main hall with pews, a small office, a storage room in the back, and a basement for supplies. Father O'Malley ran the place. He was a kind older guy in his 60s who lived in a rectory next door. My shifts were usually evenings, cleaning up after services or events, mopping floors, dusting the altar, that sort of thing. It was peaceful work, and I liked the quiet. The pay wasn't great, but it beat dealing with noisy job sites. One thing about that church, the front door had this long, drawn-out creak whenever you opened it. It was from the old hinges. They were rusty and needed oiling, but Father O'Malley always said it gave the place character. He'd joke that it was like the church announcing visitors. I'd hear it all the time during the day when people came in for prayers or meetings, but at night, when I was alone, it stood out more. The door was heavy wood with a latch that clicked shut firmly behind you. No wind could budge it. You had to push hard to get in. That particular night was a Tuesday in October, cool and rainy outside. I'd been working late because there'd been a funeral earlier, and the place needed extra tidying, flowers to clear out, programs to pick up from the pews. Father O'Malley had left around 8 p.m. to visit a parishioner in the hospital. He told me to lock up when I was done, and he'd be back late, maybe around 11. I nodded, no big deal. I had my headphones in, listening to a podcast about true crime stories, ironic, looking back, while I vacuumed the carpet in the main hall. The church was dimly lit, just the overhead lights on low and a couple of lamps near the altar. Outside, the streetlights flickered through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows on the walls. Around 10:30, I was wrapping up, putting away the cleaning supplies in the basement. That's when I heard it. That long creak from the front door. It started low, like a groan, and dragged on for a good 5 seconds before the latch clicked. I pulled out one earbud and paused. "Father O'Malley?" I called out, figuring he'd come back early. No answer. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe he was just grabbing something from his office and didn't hear me. I finished stacking the boxes and headed up the stairs to the main floor. The hall was empty. No lights had been turned on brighter, no coat on the rack by the door. I walked to the front, peering through the small window in the door. The parking lot was dark, just my beat-up Toyota sitting there in the rain. The door was shut tight, latched like always. I tried the handle, locked from the inside, which meant if someone had come in, they'd have to be here. But there was no one. I scanned the pews, the side aisles, and even poked my head into the small vestibule where the holy water font was. Nothing. No wet footprints on the floor from the rain, no umbrella dripping. Weird, but I told myself maybe I'd imagined it. Old buildings make noises, right? Creaks from settling wood or whatever. I shook it off and went back to grab my jacket from the office. A few minutes later, as I was checking the thermostat to turn it down for the night, I heard footsteps. Clear as day, slow, heavy thuds on the wooden floor in the main hall. Not rushed, like someone pacing or walking casually. My heart picked up a bit. "Father? That you?" I called out louder this time. The footsteps stopped immediately, mid-stride. Silence. Now I was on edge. The church wasn't huge, but it had nooks. Behind the altar, the confessional booths, a small choir loft upstairs. I grabbed my flashlight from the office drawer, the big maglite one I used for checking dark corners, and stepped out. "Hello, anyone there?" I said, trying to sound firm. No response. The rain pattered on the roof, but inside it was dead quiet. I thought maybe a homeless person had slipped in earlier, looking for shelter. It happens sometimes in cities, though our suburb was pretty safe. Or perhaps a kid playing a prank. Some teens hung out nearby. I decided to check thoroughly before leaving. I didn't want to lock someone in overnight. I started with the main hall, shining the light under pews, behind the statues of saints. Nothing. The confessional was empty, doors ajar like I'd left them after dusting. I climbed the narrow stairs to the choir loft, creaky steps but no one up there, just dusty hymnals and an old organ. Back down, I checked the office. Desk clear, no one hiding under it or in the closet. The storage room next, boxes of candles, altar cloths, cleaning stuff. I moved a few stacks, but it was all normal. Basement again, furnace humming softly, no signs of disturbance. The whole search took maybe 15 minutes, and by the end I was starting to feel silly. Maybe the footsteps were just the building shifting in the wind, or my imagination after that creak. I headed back to the front, keys in hand, ready to lock up and go home. That's when it happened. A loud slam from the back. Not just any door, it was the storage room door, the one I'd just checked. It banged shut hard, like someone had yanked it with force. I froze, keys jingling in my shaking hand. My mind raced. No way that was wind. The room had no windows, and the door was heavy, with a spring hinge that closed slowly on its own. It didn't slam unless you made it. "Who's there?" I yelled, voice cracking a little. Silence again. Now I was scared, heart pounding, palms sweaty. Part of me wanted to bolt out the front door, but I couldn't just leave the church like that. What if someone was hurt or messing with stuff? I gripped the flashlight like a club and walked back, slow and quiet. The storage room door was closed tight. I hadn't shut it myself. I'd left it open after checking. I listened to the wood. Nothing, no breathing or shuffling. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed it open fast, flashlight beam sweeping in. Something smacked me right on the forehead, not hard enough to knock me out, but sharp, like a dull thump that made me stagger back a step. I cursed, rubbing my head, feeling a small welt forming. What the hell? I shone the light around frantically. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Boxes stacked, mop in the corner, no one there. No shelves near the door that could have fallen, no hanging tools or chains. The ceiling was solid, no loose panels. Whatever hit me had come from inside, right as the door swung in, but there was nothing close enough to do that. I checked the door itself, smooth wood, no protrusions. I even felt around the frame, thinking maybe a spring or mechanism, but it was just an old door. I backed out, slammed it shut myself this time, and got out of there fast. Locked the front door behind me, that creak echoing longer than ever in my ears. Driving home, I kept glancing in the rear view. The next morning I called Father O'Malley and told him I was quitting, no notice. He was surprised and asked if something had happened. I gave him the short version. strange noises, got hit by something unexplained. He chuckled a bit, said the church was old, but had no weird history, no ghost stories or break-ins. Just a plain parish since the 50s. I said no thanks. I found a new job cleaning offices downtown, daytime shifts only.